Sorry.
Yeah.
Well,
All right. Hello,
do
everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG Architecture Conformance subproject meeting for July 28th, 2020. And please follow our code of conduct and be respectful and kind with one another. And shall I turn it over to you, Hippie, to do the rest of the hosting here?
that sounds great. I will share my screen here shortly. Share. I will need to have permission if you'll
Oh, all right.
do said granting. I think the beard looks really good.
Thank you. My wife hated it for the first 2 weeks, and now she loves it. So hey, it's all good.
Share conformance meeting. Share. I think it's just the whole desktop. Pardon me for I've not shared this way before. I miss my desktop.
Oh yeah, you usually have a Linux box, don't you?
And screens. I'm on a laptop in the cafe, so I only have the one screen. It's Ministrivia. Please sign in. Thank you, Rian, for taking notes today. I see a lot of the II team has put their notes there. Put your name. Discussion. We're trying to time box these. The first item on the open discussion is privilege-based profiles, which I'm excited to see. So on our first link here, this is a PR that John has asked us to take a look at and review. And, do you want me to hand that over to you for discussion,
Sure.
or do you want us to go ahead and feedback? Go for it, John.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about profiles for a long time, and I think for previous meetings we were sort of in general agreement that, at the very least, separating out user-level things versus privileged things was useful. One, we have customers who actually ask for that. We have our people who actually ask to be able to run that without creating a privileged account, and two, for vendors who may want to have a more highly managed. I think with Clayton's here, OpenShift, I think they have managed clusters. They don't necessarily give cluster admin privileges, and other people do too. Try to go through and define the criteria for what tests would be in these two profiles of base and privileged. We have talked a lot about profiles, but at least let's try and, in my mind, let's try and do something, because we just keep talking about it, and this seemed to be what I was hearing is the most agreeable to people. Eventually we may have more, half a dozen we want to shoot for, roughly, profiles. And so, but to get it started, I've defined what I see. So what I see it as is not only things that test privileged features, but also tests that require privileges in order to execute. So what that means is some of the things like some of the scheduling things aren't easy. We can't really test them to be taint nodes or whatever we may do, preemption. Some of these things require modifications to the cluster that would be sort of not in the purview of an ordinary user. And so those tests have to be categorized into the privileged profile as well. So that's what this does. And then there's a subsequent PR that actually takes this and goes through all the existing conformance tests and categorizes them according to these two things. We end up with, it was 62 privileged tests and 200 and some odd base tests. So I do see there's some reviews there, yeah, open the floor for comments and abuse.
So thanks a lot, John, for doing this. I think this does make a lot of sense. A couple of questions I had. I did look through the spreadsheet you had there, which categorizes the tests. Did you have like a notion that you followed with respect to things like host path, host network, host port? I see some of them at least marked with the host path and host network
Yeah. So
reason.
anything that would grant any kind of access to a host level thing, it was considered privileged. So host port, host network, um, all of those things. And then there's some there's this one empty dir one that's looking for a race condition that could probably be fixed to not require cluster admin. It's like the last one. That, this one, first of all, I don't know why looking for a race condition is a conformance test anyway. It's not a functional test. So I would either say demote that out of conformance or fix it so it doesn't need cluster admin. But for the first cut, we're past code freeze obviously for 119, but we're not past test freeze. So I was kind of hoping that if possible we could, if there's general agreement on this, we could implement this in 119 and make that happen now rather than waiting another cycle.
Cool. I guess the one thing I noticed was that with respect to something like node port, a couple of tests that were using node port as well, which would require privileges on the nodes in the Kubernetes cluster. Those might have not been marked as privileged. I was wondering if that's also something you want to address here.
Node port, possibly, yeah. Which one specifically? We should check it out. Node port in general, I wouldn't expect to require those privileges. There were things that required host networking because they were testing node to pod networking.
Right. Right. So I guess there was at least a few tests. Maybe I'll comment offline on the document.
Yeah, please do, because we'd like to get it right. I did the best I could to categorize them, but there's a couple hundred of them. It's easy to miss. So
yeah, sure. I'll spend some time looking at the document. We have a set of tests that we've kind of categorized as requiring some of these. So maybe we can leverage some of that information and help you here.
Abhishek, do you want to speak to what we is here so people know where you're coming from and what you do?
Yes. Sorry, I guess I should introduce myself. So I'm Abhishek. I work at VMware, mostly on Project Pacific. And if you're aware of our supervisor cluster, we run Kubernetes pods as VMs. And so, part of the idea with running Kubernetes pods as VMs is also to make sure that we have this isolation between the hypervisor and the pods that are running as VMs on those hypervisors. And so we kind of categorize all of our tests based on this notion of hypervisor isolation. And some of the tests obviously don't work in our environment because there is, the hypervisor is not really something that can be directly accessed by pod entities or container network or containers running on the hypervisor itself. So yeah, just a short background there. I guess the help that we could probably provide here is with respect to all of these tests and some of the work we've done around categorizing them into privileged and non-privileged tests.
Yeah, absolutely. Please take a look, comment anywhere on the PR. Probably better on the PR than the spreadsheet, but comment either place. But we'll see it on the PR more likely than we'll see it on the spreadsheet. That sounds great. I want to make sure, I think services functioning as expected is pretty core. We don't, obviously load balancer services are not part of conformance because they never have been and they don't make sense as part of conformance, but meaning external load balancers. But I'm not clear if you're saying node port services. with
Right.
menu allocations within the node port range or with automatic allocations within the node port range, or either one cause a problem for you? Is that what you're saying, or node port services at all?
Right. So node port in itself, essentially requires you to open a port on, for example, in our case, the hypervisor, and access to the hypervisor is privileged. And so we don't expect customer pods or workloads to actually be able to open ports on the hypervisor because that breaks the trust model there. That was kind of the thinking around that.
I see. Yeah, I mean, personally, I can understand that. It's allocating a shared node resource,
Yeah.
as opposed to something that's user level. I think this starts to pick at when we'd want more profiles, but as a first cut, right, that might make sense to be more conservative on the base. Any other thoughts there from any of my compatriots on the conformance project?
Yeah, I think I talked to Clayton a little bit about this before the call, and I know he wasn't able to join, so I'm trying to provide some input. I think generally the current split base and privilege makes sense. The only thing I'm curious about is when you allude to other potential profile types, I'm wondering what the delineations are you might see. And fine to say I don't know yet, but right now it seems like the privileged one combines root on cluster as well as root on node. And what I was wondering is if some of these tests where it's like ability to open a reserve port or ability to run as root user inside a container, like certain features that we might add in Cube itself would help us alleviate some of those restrictions. So like user namespace is one of the things that a lot of people are interested in supporting, where I could see us wanting to maybe provide more variation on privilege versus base. And so I was just curious if you had like node privileged versus what my application operational environment is that's presented the container itself privileges. Like, can I appear to run as root in my container?
So those are like kind of undecided questions. Ooh, I'm hearing a lot of echo. I think those are somewhat open. I mean, I think that you're absolutely right that both things that are sort of root on node and root on cluster are combined here in this privileged one, and I'd be open to the idea of separating those out at some point. The other way, we don't know yet. We've had a lot of discussions about how we might divide these things up, and there's this tension between whether we divide them up based on sort of functional things, like, okay, some base level thing plus this root on node, root on cluster, plus maybe cluster ingress, which would include node ports, maybe, which I was thinking of base, but maybe node ports belongs there, and external and load balancer services, and the ingress. Like, those are sort of functional definitions of these profiles, and they make a lot of sense to me. But the main concern with those is that we would end up with like dozens of them, and that would be overwhelming for people, as opposed to maybe grouping them into very broad categories of like lowest common denominator for user functions, that's base, and then this sort of privileged one, and the maybe, or alternatively, it could be by use case. It could be like stateless, stateful. We talked about having ones that were like, quote, cloud provider, which basically was everything in the kitchen sink. And I think those are all up for debate right now. The reality is, the one that we've gotten kind of feedback from the world on is this division, which could be further refined the way you're saying, Derek. But the reality is, I believe that most vendors are going to be like, okay, as long as I can meet base, I'm happy, because now I can say I'm Kubernetes. And there's no stick or carrot particularly for meeting optional profiles, they get a different badge. The idea was they get a base badge and a privilege badge and a, I don't know, network ingress, cluster ingress tag or something like that, or badge. But
yeah, I get all that. I know that we discussed that in the architecture SIG, and I'm actually less coming to this from like a usage of trademark perspective versus like a, can a test be mapped to more than one profile? And then just trying to think through if there's a difference potentially on like what the, I don't think of the right term. It's hard for me to say, but I'm trying to think about like the application operational environment, like that which you see when you execute your pod inside your pod, separate from the cluster environment, which is like that which you see that you can taint a node, right? That type of thing. And so what I was wondering is like if you had, we had thoughts on maybe subdividing privilege to be privileged to the cluster versus privileged in my application operational environment. Like I could see a running as root user is different than ability to taint a node or something from inside the container. And
I hear you. Like I think with this last meeting, we had the same conversation. I was like, there's these two different, there's like the control plane and the data plane, you might think of it as, right? There's like, as this application operating, I can talk to the downward API, right? As opposed to, so it's what the view looks like from the inside out or to the workloads that are running versus what the view looks like to the operator. And I think the conclusion there was, I don't know if that mattered or not. I think that I think there's something there, but I still don't know what to do.
Yeah, the only reason I bring this up, and this is my own feedback, it's not Clayton's necessarily, is like putting my vendor hat on right now, like when I try to say like, what is a compatibility guide for OpenShift, right? Yeah. Like it's clear we'd say, hey, you're conformance, but like that's not necessarily an application compatibility guide. So you're like, what is it that I see in my operational environment for my app itself is like the distinction or the language I was writing with my Red Hat hat on when for materials we put out as our vendor to say like there's kind of a difference between like you said, user plane or data plane. That's another way of phrasing it, but it was just I'm fine that we can evolve it, I guess. I was just curious if you had thoughts on that.
My thoughts are right about the same level of yours are, that this seems like it would a meaningful thing, but I don't know what to do with it yet. Yeah. I mean, the sort of in the limit, right? What you're talking about becomes, to me, a set of profiles. You're basically a CRD for a profile that a cluster can advertise. I meet these profiles for these operational type of requirements, and therefore, and then a packaging product like Helm or whatever can actually validate, look in the package and say, oh, this needs these packages. Oh, this cluster supports these packages. I can successfully deploy to this cluster. That's kind of in the limit of, to me, ideally, what this could evolve into, but there's no, as far as I can tell, real demand for that. Right now, the demand we're seeing is much lower bar.
Yeah, okay. Basically, the classical dividing line we've had on Red Hat side has been like, can I run as user 0 in my Docker file or not? And that's like the common application operating environment, like dividing line of privilege, which is separate from the, like, do I have privilege on the cluster necessarily? And mostly I was just trying to think about how to map this when we talk about features that are coming up in SIG node on user namespace remapping, which has been shockingly popular lately. So
okay,
that's all.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I think that let's keep that open for discussion and evolving in that direction. I think it makes sense.
Is there any in generating of these lists of ones that are required for privilege? Is it a static analysis? Are we did you analyze the runtime, like as an electric fence of some sort? What was your primary driver for separation?
I mean, it's static for the most part. I ran the tests with some reduced privileges to see which ones would fail, and sussed out a few that were surprising to me with that because of like the one I said at the end, the empty dir race condition check. Like looking at it, you wouldn't think it needs host. There's also a couple others that need that use host port to force preemption. I think there's one that like maybe there's another way to do that. A lot of the resource ones use a fake resource, which I assume some of these are my assumptions. I assume that to create a fake node resource, that's requires some administrator privileges. You can't just do that as a user. Yeah, that was my methodology basically.
John, can I ask a question? Ben Curry here from VMware. Thinking about the privileged example, we're kind of in this example asserting something through the absence of tests to some extent, right? We say, okay, well, this system, you know, denies access to certain privileged things, so therefore we can pass the base, but we can't pass the privilege. Is this model flexible enough, do you think, for us to have a mechanism where we can assert, you know, through the existence of tests rather than through the absence of tests, where we have, say, a system that denies access to privileged things, and we have a certain profile that says, oh, well, we can assert that you actually can't do all of these things as part of conformance. Does that make sense?
You're saying, well, the way that the profiles has been discussed in the past, in the way that even before I got involved, this sort of group decided on it, and this is open for discussion, I suppose, but was that they're additive. So that means that
right.
that it's not an either or profile. It's a, you can meet base, and then you can meet this one, you can meet this one, you can meet this one,
sure.
And then they're not. So if you were to do that, I mean, that would be, we're not trying to say, like something could meet base and it could meet half of the privileges, half of the privilege profile. It would only be able to advertise itself as supporting base, as being conforming to base.
Yeah.
We're not trying to assert that base doesn't support privileged. That would be a different thing. It's not really part of the.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense to me. I guess I was, you know, thinking that if you know, we wanted to add a bunch of tests, for example, that assert that you can't do a bunch of things in an environment that you know, denies access to specific things, right? So we're saying that, you know, this lockdown system is locked down in various useful ways, and we can use conformance tests to assert that those things are locked down. If we were to do that and augment the tests in that way, I just wonder how that would sit with this, because if we have kind of a privileged profile that asserts that you can do a whole bunch of privileged things, is there scope for having like a non-privileged profile where you asserts that you can't? You see what I'm saying?
I mean, not in the conformance program as it is today.
Okay.
You know, not to say we can't move in that direction if people want to, but that's
sure.
not. Again, the intent was to really the only stick the conformance program has is trademark. Okay. And so you know, and the carrot is fancy badges that vendors can put on anything, right? That's it. That's the whole. So like, this kind of alters the bar for the stick because it allows people to be conformant even though they're can't successfully pass certain tests, but it allows those who do pass those tests to advertise a more functional cluster. Yeah. Right. Okay. So that's sort of as far as it goes. I think there's interesting ideas around, like, I don't know if I'd call it conformance, but around, like, you know, coming up with standard use case type clusters that can be and validating it. But I guess in scope is conformance. Not in scope is that it's a quality cluster. You can ship a piece of garbage, and if it met all these tests, it would be still certified. I wish we had the resources to do quality, but we don't really.
That's
where we
a
put
helpful
scalability
distinction.
out, all these things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a helpful distinction. I think just the thing that got me thinking was just your description of function and how useful this is to users and thinking about functional capabilities. But yeah, what you said makes perfect sense. Okay.
Dims, you're muted right now.
So Ben and Abhishek, will we be able to help in this effort?
Yes.
I'm trying to put you on the
That was a
spot.
very smiling question there.
Awesome. That's awesome. And I would say if you're going to help, and if there's no objections here, given that this is just changes to test code, basically labeling a bunch of tests, I think it can go in before test freeze, which is in a week or less. And so if you're going to help, today or tomorrow would be really a good time to do it.
Okay, good. Yeah. What is there a good Slack channel to collaborate on?
The Kate's conformance one is fine.
Okay, Kate's conformance. Okay. Yeah, no, this would be great. It's something we've been looking at for quite a while, and it's actually surprising how few tests are an issue for us, given the degree to which our setup is distinct from a lot of setups. But
Right.
yeah, absolutely, we can help.
Okay, excellent. Look forward to it. Unless there's other people who want to talk about this, I'm done.
Thanks, John, and the VMware folks for stepping up to help. Aaron, I saw you were trying to speak, so yield.
I do want to help see this move forward, and I get all that. There's a part of me that wonders what the check or balance is to make sure that base is still a sufficiently useful profile. Advocating on behalf of the user, like, is base going to provide me meaningful functionality, or is it something that vendors with a really strong bent on security end up cherry picking things out of, to the point that it is effectively not really that useful? I don't know where the dividing line is there, but I just want to make sure we keep the user in mind, because ultimately, back to the point of, like, should we do negative testing? I don't know that as a user I would be really interested in looking for which clusters don't support a piece of given functionality, because I care about workload portability first and foremost. So I want to make sure, like, which Kubernetes offerings are going to be able to run my workload given what features I use, what behaviors I expect.
Yeah, I think that the only check and balance is those of us who approve these, right? And the criteria that we define for each profile. So if you look at the PR in the community repo, what I do is I explicitly define that the only basically difference between privileged and base is that the privileged ones require some special above and beyond an ordinary user level of privilege, either from a workload perspective or from a cluster administrator perspective. So, I mean, I think that there should be sufficient functionality in Kubernetes to support a lot of workloads without those privileges.
Yeah. The other way to also look at this is, like, we have to augment the base to get to the point where we are testing all the things that we need to test.
Yes.
And that's been a constant challenge, and I haven't been able to spend time on it either. So that's definitely something we need to figure out how to get over.
Hippie's team has been making great progress in that regard, and they've added a lot of stuff on there. So, and they're continuing to work at it. So I think we're making progress there.
Okay.
We are good. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, no, okay. Thank you for, like, driving this, and look forward to help from VMware. It's really appreciated.
Sure, thank you.
To the point that John was making earlier, our next topic of conversation is some updates to the API Snoop Conformance Progress page. This is not merged yet, but it will be. There was some feedback. Don't make it so red. It looks like debt. But the orange is where our growth is accumulating for a backlog of debt. The solid green is how many endpoints we have conformance over. The the more dark green, this one, or the lighter green, is endpoints that we have old debt that is now conformance coverage. And then this new one here, in this release 119, we currently had 41 new endpoints, and we were able to ensure that all of them came with conformance test. This is a little bit of a new update from what we had before, so that you can see really clearly every release. We've had, let's see, 7, a couple of slow quarters or slow releases. We had 10. I think we're going to get around 35 is my hope. And with your help and looking at some of the promotions that we have and ensuring they are super solid, we can have more endpoints added, old endpoint debt removed this release than we had for the prior 4 releases. And that's good. There was also an ask to show it over a percentage release rather than numbers, so we can see we are going to be over halfway there this release. Very good. If you want to see where the debt sits, notice we didn't add any new debt in this release, just those 41 new endpoints. One thing nice now is if you're on here, this is not on the front page yet, but when you click on it, it'll take you to the release. And on that release, it will list the new endpoints that came in for this particular release. And at the, you'll notice all of the stable ones have tests. And we got a few beta ones that don't have any tests yet. So we maybe as we progress to having a bot, when things get promoted from alpha to beta or even into beta, saying, hey, no, you have some stuff that doesn't have tests yet. Just a reminder that to get to stable, you're going to need a conformance test. If you go to switch release and go back, while we're on the topic of profiles, you can note that we have quite a few stable endpoints that are not tested and not conformant. A lot of these revolve around storage, and these were just promoted our last release. So while we are looking at currently the easy to delineate, somewhat easy to delineate privilege area, I do feel that most of our end users would love to be able to store data in their cloud, not just have workload.
Well, I think those specifically, I don't know the details of how CSI works, but those look like they're changes to drivers configuration. I would think that we can use a dummy driver to conformance test those endpoints. That's not necessarily the actual storage.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true or not, but that would seem.
We have a filter in place, and we should probably have somewhere to note these are the endpoints that we have decided are optional, because we're talking mainly around profiles, but we don't necessarily have a definition of what those profiles are, other than we're talking about flagging some tests as to what they run.
I mean, what I'm saying, I guess, is that I would think that the configuration surface area for CSI would be part of base. Like even if you're a cluster that has stateless, you can support the configuration surface area. You don't have to support any particular drivers that if you don't support stable services. That would be my expectation anyway.
Let me see. We have some CRD deletes that are still missing, and these are probably valid things that do need to get tested that kind of snuck in there. If you look back on that conformance page. So that's the updates for that page. We can do those older releases there, and we have that more detailed breakdown. That's it for the API Snoop site itself. Zach is on the call. He's done all of the hard labor on the site itself, and including the database, which we use underneath the query. We should probably, if anybody's interested, we can get together and show you how we use the EDE runs and the data from those to decide what tests have been hitting what endpoints. it might be interesting as well to look at doing some type of fencing as we decide other profiles to help flag tests during their runs as to whether or not they're doing things that we're trying to restrict particular profiles. As far as our quick reviews, I think we have a few moments left on our LGTMs for these two to decide whether we want to try to get them into this milestone. This first one, this is the test grid link for promote resource lifecycle test. There's a few, it's on hold for now. There's two similar comments, and we've had a lot of, it's been a hard few weeks for testing. This looks pretty green. With regards to the time it takes for us to get our tests tested and trying to clearly understand when it's our test that's failing versus when the infra is failing. So when we have a few, let's say 4 to 10 times where it's the infra failing, we start to not look so closely, and we let a few things where we actually merged some E2E tests that were flaky, and that was less delightful.
Yeah, I mean, generally we're having a big problem with this right now. So Aaron could probably talk for the next 2 hours about that.
I'll try not to take up this meeting with all of that time, but this one PR I think looks pretty good. And I think, Rion, if you want to confirm, if this promotion merges with the rest of our existing stuff that's soaking within the 2-week window for test merge, we'll get 35 points for this release. Our target was 40, but that will definitely get us up above 50% coverage.
There is, if I can speak quickly to what we have on the list, there's basically 3 items that we would really like to get in this cycle. This one here, the first one, 90939, is ready to go. I think it's ran long enough. It's got its 2 weeks, all green, so we'll appreciate some badges on that to get it through.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that one.
The next one I'll skip for now. Let's go to the next heading, need next week. These 2 was created by Stephen. It's 17 endpoints, but we really would like to get in as well, and that will take us to the 35. They both ran very good, clear runs. The test grid link is in the PRs, and there was some minor flakes right in the beginning because there was a test created or a function created specifically to cause another test to fail for a specific test reason. And Ligget's team created a workaround. So our test was basically our test pick up their problem that they deliberately created to pick up something else. If I explain it correctly, Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong. So they fixed their bit to not let our test pick them up. And since then, it's been running sweetly green for a long time. So if we can get all 3 of these in, it would be a beautiful day. That is on those 3. And then, if you remember a few meetings ago, we discussed the metadata that's missing from some of the E2E tests. Stephen went and did a sterling job in researching exactly when all those came in. He did the PR for it. We just a few minutes ago got our LGTM, so we can get all the badges on that, make it merge, and will also help us with other work that we're working to do against testing.
Okay.
These are in my queue, I promise. I've just had other fires crop up, but I will take a look at these very soon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's all for me for open PR, so it's quiet on the front of PRs.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I'm tempted to give you back around 15 to 18 minutes of your time. But one quick shout out to Nikita and some of the VMware folks that I'm hoping to meet with next week. They're interested in looking at some of the test driving, and I'm super excited to spend some time with them. I'm going to do that earlier in the day because it's too late in the day for her team to attend this meeting. So just shouts out to them, her and their team. Otherwise, enjoy your day. Stop by Kate's Conformance channel, and looking forward to sharing within this release a large increase in coverage.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.